Hello everybody, fellow YouTubers, welcome. This is another analyzed chess game of mine from RedHotPawn.com. Was in the last round of a tournament that I won this game, but unfortunately I lost the other one, so we have to play another round to determine who wins it. If I win it, it will be my first Red Hot Pawn tournament victory. So you can root for me there if you like, or you can root against me, either way. But this I thought was an interesting game where Black made a weakening move in the middle, which hurt him later on in the game, and hopefully this will be instructive as we go along. I was the white, had the white pieces, and I played e4, as I virtually always do. My opponent played c5, knight f3, knight c6, pretty standard, and then I played d4, which is the open Sicilian. He plays c takes d4, again a typical move in the open Sicilian, knight takes d4, and now the open Sicilian can vary a little bit. Black can play d6, Black can play g6 and go into the dragon Sicilian. Black can play e6. Very often you move a pawn up one spot in this spot, or of course Black can right away play knight f6. But instead, Black plays knight takes d4, and white, of course, I play queen takes d4. Of course, the reason why Black very often doesn't do this is because this position, although obviously it's even materially, White does have a little bit more space in the center. White's queen is developed to a pretty good spot. White has a pawn on e4, and Black really has to start from scratch over here. So Black continues with d6, solid move. Knight c3, again a developing move. You want to develop your knights, why not? No reason not to. Bishop d7, the typical defense in the open Sicilian. I play bishop c4, trying to, again, now it's time to develop the bishops. Might as well castle kingside when there's no compelling reason not to. It's usually better to castle kingside. So to do that, you develop a bishop. There's no real other good place for me to develop it to. I can develop it to e2, but that's a very conservative move. If I develop it to d3, well then it's hemmed in by my own pawn. If I develop it all the way out here to b5, it can be traded off. Actually, well, there's no inherent reason to do that and get it exposed to being traded off right away. So I develop it to c4, which hits at the weak f7 pawn. So now Black plays knight f6. Hitting at my pawn over here. Obviously, it's protected until now, but you know what? Why not? That way, of course, Black continues to develop his pieces. Now, eventually, he's going to have to develop his bishop either to g7, or he's going to have to move his e-pawn. But if you notice, again, Black is still in a pretty defensive position. White definitely has a little bit more space in the center. So, I play bishop g5. I realize that increases the pressure a little bit. I could have castled there, but again, there's no inherent reason to castle right away. There'll be plenty of time for that later on. It's not like I have to face any imminent threats, but I do that just to add a little bit of pressure to Black's position, because I realize if Black is going to play g6, then this knight is going to be pawned, going to be pinned against his rook. And if he's going to move the e-pawn, well then his knight is going to be pinned against the queen. So really no matter what Black does, and he has to move one of those pawns over here because he needs to develop this bishop in order to be able to castle, in order to be able to get a little bit more freedom, but I'm just trying to ratchet up the pressure a little bit on Black over here. So now Black plays e5. Now, he had to move one of these pawns, the g-pawn or the e-pawn, but what I've experienced a few times in games, these kinds of open games in the middle where the queen has some freedom, is that this is very often a weakening move. In general, you want to try to avoid this kind of move, where you play e5. You know, it looks like a pretty good move because it develops with tempo. He moves his pawn over here. Obviously, I have to move my queen, and then, of course, he can develop his bishop to e7, while therefore unpinning the knight. So that way you really kill two birds with one stone. The problem with this move, and you'll see why it's a problem a little bit later on in the game, is it exposes a weakness, and the weakness is the d-pawn. This pawn is now a backwards pawn over here. There are no pawns that can protect it. The c-pawn is gone. The d-pawn's already way out here. He's never going to be able to move that pawn up to d5 because that is hit by four pieces of mine. Notice this pawn, this bishop, this knight, and the queen. So this pawn is really going to be a perpetual weakness and a backwards pawn. Right now, of course, it's protected by the bishop, and if he moves the light squared bishop, then the queen will protect it, but this pawn can be a very substantial weakness as the game moves along. But of course, in the immediate term, I have to get the queen out of there, so queen d3. I could move it, really I could move it to e2 or e1. I don't want to move it to e1 because then I undevelop it. So keep it in a position where it can protect this pawn, where it's still in a pretty central spot. So he plays bishop c6, trying to hit this pawn. Now it's twice attacked and it's still twice defended, but eventually this pawn could be a little bit of a weakness for me. Not as much of a weakness as this pawn, as the d pawn is going to be for him, because my e pawn is not a backwards pawn. I always have that f pawn that can protect it if need be. So now I castle. Again, there's no real... all my pieces are developed, so now it's time to get the king out of there. I could have castled equally on the king side or the queen side. Why didn't I castle queenside? I mean, if you think about it, if I would have castled queenside, well, then I would have put an extra piece, the rook and the queen. I would have put an extra piece on this pawn. But I still think it looks like as we go along in the game, the queen side is going to be a little bit more open. And also I might eventually think of playing f4. I might try and attack on the king side over here. So I'd rather have my king on the king side. So that's where I put it. He plays bishop e7, a logical developing move. Obviously, he wants to be able to castle. And now, of course, I want to go ahead and start hitting his weakness. What's his weakness? The backwards d pawn. It's still being protected twice, but I realize sooner or later the key to this game is going to be trying to attack that backwards d pawn. So, of course, I play rook a d1. Excuse me, I don't know what happened just there, but I play rook a d1. Now, it's his move. He castles. Again, really it's the last developing move for him. And now I see a very interesting weakness on his component. Take a minute, you might want to pause the video, see if you can see a weakness that he has, other than, obviously, the backwards d pawn, which I can't hit immediately. Well, he's got an overworked piece. The concept of an overworked piece is a very basic concept when you're first learning chess, and that is a piece that's really trying to do too much. And what's his overworked piece? The dark squared bishop. On the one hand, it's kind of strange because the bishop is totally hemmed in, which makes it look like a very weak piece. But on the other hand, it's overworked. Why is it overworked? Because it's protecting this pawn. You remember, I've got two pieces attacking it, he's got two pieces defending it. But in addition, it's protecting this knight. It's protecting the knight on f6. If I take it with my bishop, for example, he doesn't want to take it with the g-pawn. If he does, he opens up the king side. He opens up the king with a wide open g-file, which is a tremendously weakening move. Nevertheless, it's really that is the weakness, and that's why I hit on it. Normally when there are two, you'd rather have the two bishops than the two knights, but in order to expose a little bit of a weakness, trading the bishop off is worth it, and so therefore I play bishop takes f6. So he's got a choice. If he takes with the bishop, this pawn falls. And once this pawn falls, this pawn may not be too long for this world either. That could really hurt his center a lot. He'd be down a pawn. He'd be in a little bit of trouble. If he takes it with the g-pawn, then he exposes his king. He plays g takes f6. Now here I probably made a little bit of a mistake. I went over quickly and I played queen g3 check. Now the thing is, I had that option open pretty much whenever I liked. I probably could have done that a little bit later on, but I did it right away. So of course he plays king h8. That's literally his only move. And here I have a chance to bring a piece right into the middle of the action, really to become a bone in his throat. And that piece is, of course, my knight, knight d5. That does a whole bunch of things. It eliminates the weakness on this pawn. This pawn was being hit by the bishop, might become a little bit of a weakness. It hits this bishop, which I can always trade off if I like. Obviously right now the compensation that he has for his wide open g-file is the fact that he has the two bishops, whereas I have the bishop and the knight. So I can even that out by taking this bishop, by trapping it basically. If this pawn becomes a weakness eventually, I'm hitting this pawn at least. Obviously now he's got two pieces defending it, but eventually I might be able to turn it into a weakness. So I played knight d5. Again, notice how much more space in the center I have. His bishop is tied down. His rook isn't doing very much right now. I've got a half open file for this rook, a bishop in a central square, a knight in a central square, etc. So he plays rook g8 to get my queen out of there. And again, that's probably the reason why I shouldn't have played the queen over there in the first place. This allows him to chase my queen and get tempo, and get a tempo, of course. So I played queen f3. Why? Of course, to step up pressure on this pawn. and of course to protect my e-pawn. If this knight ever moves, I don't want him to be able to take my e-pawn. And I realize if for whatever reason this queen moves, or the bishop moves, well then this pawn is going to fall, because I've got two pieces attacking this pawn. So now he moves his bishop back. He plays bishop d7. Obviously, what's he threatening? He's threatening bishop d4, winning the rook, winning the exchange actually. Because if he does that, obviously I have to move my queen, and then the rook falls. So I didn't really see any great way to avoid that, other than to simply play h3. That really defends against that. Doesn't do a whole lot else, but doesn't really weaken my position much either at this point. So he plays rook g6. If he's got an open g-file, which he does, which is a weakness, on the other hand, he could turn it into a strength. How do you turn it into a strength? Double up. Get a battery. Get a battery on that g-file. Maybe he can make some hay over here. Notice the fact that he's got the bishop hitting this pawn. Eventually, if the queen isn't here, let's say, for example, if my queen was in a different place, then this pawn would be hanging, because this pawn obviously couldn't retake. So he's trying to turn a weakness into a strength, which is, of course, always a good idea. So I played knight takes